Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the CSL Week 3, if memory serves. And if it doesn't, then I'm going to feel very, very silly because I really should be able to count to 3. I don't actually work at Valve. We are going to be getting into the first match of the night here between Simon Fraser and UCSC, standing for University of California, I'm assuming Santa Cruz, because that is where Santa Cruz is. And both of these teams with undefeated records promise a good matchup tonight because somebody's going home with their records broken. My name is Octavian. I am joined here on the desk by Brian Starkey, who doesn't get to have one of the fancy caster names that the rest of us do. He's just going by his real name because, he's upfront and honest about what he does, unlike me. And let's get into the picks and bans here.
Yeah, thanks for the intro, Octavian. I'm really excited to see how this is going to play out here. Talia and Rek'Sai being banned out first by Simon Fraser. The Talia ban is a little unexpected just because we haven't seen very much of it being banned out. Maybe a target ban at I Am Eternal.
Possibly.
Talia does apply some good pressure, and she's a very good roaming, and we see a lot of that in this meta right now. The high-pressure mid laners that look to roam either to that bot lane to try to get that first tower down, or maybe up to the top lane to make something happen. LeBlanc getting bland out, and as well as Camille, both very, very strong champions right now.
Yeah. Aside from that, Talia, I would say the rest of the ban list is really not surprising in the least. Hecarim is sort of starting to fall out of favor with picks like Rengar coming into the scene, speaking of. But none of these champions really flying in the face of the meta, aside perhaps from that Talia. But the Rengar first pick is going to be a jungle priority for the side of Fraser, and a decisive one as well. They lock that in just a moment or two.
Yeah, it was very, very quick pickup by Rengar, and he's a really strong pick right now. Not only because he has really strong jungle clear time, so it means he can get to your lanes faster and be a bit more obnoxious to your opponent, but the clear time also allows him to maybe go and be a little bit more obnoxious in the early game to the enemy jungler. Maybe get some level 2, level 1 fights going, or probably level 2 fight going to kind of slow him down a little bit as well.
I'm a little scared for the Zyra pick, actually. There's not much, of course, revealed between these two teams yet, but Zyra just seems a very, very squishy and dangerous pick to grab into a Rengar. But, of course, she does have some peeling capabilities of her own. She can lay down all of those roots all over the place, which could make Rengar's job tough, but if he ever gets up next to her, she's dead in an instant. However, my point is entirely dashed, as are my hopes of seeing a Zyra as we go for the Jarvan the 4th pick, which admittedly is a little more interesting.
Yeah, so the Jarvan the 4th pick, I think, comes align at least a little bit with what I have been seeing the last couple games that I've been casting. We've seen a couple of Darius picks. I've seen some Darius streamed as well. Jarvan kind of fills, in my opinion, a little bit in that same area, being able to use his QE combo to get into range, use his ult to set up some really, really good team fights, lock people off, and combine that with the Rise can be a very obnoxious combo to have.
So,
play against.
In the comparison to the Darius, does that mean you're expecting the Jarvan to go into a solo lane to fill that role, or are you simply comparing the champions in terms of kit, not really in terms of role?
In terms of kit, not necessarily role, because Jarvan does a lot more in terms of hard initiate, definitely, than Darius does. Darius merely has his pool, and maybe he can flash onto you. But there's not a whole lot of hard engage that Darius brings to the table, where Jarvan brings that to the table, but he can also tank up a lot and has a lot of natural stats that allow him to last a little bit longer than Darius.
I have to say, I was a little excited there for a moment because I thought you had some sort of, behind the doors insight on these players, and you knew there was a Jarvan lane coming, and I was going to be really excited for that, but no, it does make a lot more sense in the jungle. We're lagging behind a bit on these picks, though. Varus and Cassiopeia are going to be the next ones locked in for Fraser. Makes a lot of sense. Two very powerful picks in the current meta. I do like Cassiopeia into Rise. Cassiopeia has the same sort of rapid fire, high damage output style of play, but just outranges Rise slightly, which in a matchup where you're playing two very similar champions, that little bit of an edge usually puts you ahead. Misfortune Ashe, though, there's the MF support that that I personally have wrestled with ever since we first saw it at Worlds Season 6.
Yeah, I've had the same struggle. If anyone has tuned in on the cast that I've done with Corvus as well, every time we see an MF support, we are very, very torn. I think we've seen it about 4 times, and I've only liked it once.
That's not a good track record.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated champion to really kind of make right, to play well with. Like you can do well in lane, but like you have a really hard time carrying anything over into the mid and late game. Um, and I think that's really where you need a good support. But picking up the Maokai and Tom Kench on the side of Simon Fraser to round out that team comp a little bit.
Yeah, I really like those two pickups, actually. Going for just a whole boatload of beef. Oh, pardon me, didn't mean to tap my mic there. Got a bit too excited. Going for just a whole boatload of beef to round out a composition that was already really, really well suited in terms of damage. Varus, Rengar, Cassiopeia, they don't need any more damage in that comp. So just grabbing Maokai and Tom Kench to be these huge health bars at the front lines to help keep these immobile carries, both AD and AP, safe makes a lot of sense. But we've got the final pick there from UCSC. And any thoughts on these compositions and how they might go head-to-head here, Starkey?
Yeah, so I actually like the comp from University of Santa Clara, right?
Santa Cruz.
Santa Cruz. I'm sorry. The University of Santa Cruz, I actually really like their team comp. They have a lot more in terms of hard engage. They have about equal number of tanks, but I feel like Poppy is a little bit better. Tom Kench is a little bit out of flavor still, but he does provide that extra layer of protection for Varus or Cass if they ever get kind of hit in the back line by that J4 or that Rise kind of flank with his ultimate type of deal. So I think it really boils down to how these two really play their team compositions as it usually does. The one thing I really don't like about Simon Fraser's is they lack any form of hard engage, really.
That's pretty true,
yeah. You have the Maokai who can use his Twisted Advance, but that's a pretty short range on that. You can use Rengar to try to get a flank and engage with his ultimate, but there's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, Tom Kench can use his ult to flank as well, but I mean, you're talking about a lot of really like not ideal scenarios to start a fight. But Santa Cruz, they've got some really good stuff going for him. I mean, the J4 is excellent. He can flag and drag an ult, and that's like 3/4 of your screen.
Yeah, I mean, it does synergize decently well with the rest of the team as well. Rise likes to have the whole enemy team packed together, as does even the support Misfortune. But before we get into the match, we've pontificated a bit too long here. We've got a 2-minute spectator delay to count down through, as well as the loading screen. But give us just a few minutes, folks. We're going to play a short ad break and be back with you as soon as possible. My name's Octavian. I am joined by the illustrious and indubitable Brian Starkey on the bench here, and we're going to be getting into the match as soon as we can. Alrighty, everybody. As the keen-eared among you could have heard behind the music, we are in game. My name is Octavia, and I am joined here by Brian Starkey, and we're going to be getting started off with some great League of Legends for you here tonight at the CSL Week 3. Now, we aren't too far into the league. As I said, we are only on week 3 here, as I get the overlay all set up, hitting the wrong button. There we go. For some reason, Riot decided it's the best idea to hide the scoreboard by default from now on. I don't personally agree, but that gripe aside, we are only into week 3 here, so the teams haven't had a long time to sort of fill out the season. And so I mentioned in draft that both of these teams are undefeated. That was a bit of a misleading statement. They are both undefeated, but between these two teams, there have only been 3 series actually played. However, we are still left without a single game loss between either of these teams. And over the course of, that would be 6 games total, that's not a great sample size, but enough to start to get an idea that these teams are at least at the very top of our bracket.
Yeah, I know it's something that I like to talk about is while these teams are at the top of the bracket, I think it's really great. Even though this is only week 3, we are kind of starting to see some pretty good, in my opinion, playoff stories starting to happen, at least in a couple of the other divisions that I've been casting. And you have to be really careful, because once you start to get 1 or 2, those 2 or 3 losses under your belt, I mean, you put yourself in a dangerous position for playoffs.
As we get a pretty standard start from both junglers here, starting on the bottom side of the map for both of them, which means they'll be dancing the opposite color tango. Red buff for one, blue for the other. And we return to the lanes, or return might be the wrong word. We start these lanes off, and we're going to see who ends up victorious. One of the things that we were a little bit worried about was this Misfortune support pick in the draft. How do you think this matchup is going to play out here?
I think it just depends on her ability to kind of zone out Tom Kench, right? If Tom can use his tongue to get one of those slows down and cause some headaches, really, for cause some headaches for the Misfortune and the Ashe, then I think it will swing in favor of Nomadic and JJL on the side of Simon Fraser. Because Varus can poke you from very long range, as we just kind of saw, land an auto attack, shoot off your corrupted arrows, and then be a big obnoxious there.
Oh, Frozen Knight going to be following Range Pro over the wall, following, in fact, with a flash as well, and one more. Actually, didn't even need the leap out of the bush. It's first blood for the Knife Cat, and that is a great start for Frozen Knight and the side of Simon Fraser.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we talked about during the champion draft, right? With the strength of Rengar so early on in the game, not only can he be a headache in the later game, being able to assassinate squishy targets, but he can go into the enemy jungle, he can find them early, and if he does, you are in trouble.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why Jarvan and his sort of old school ilk aren't surviving as well in the current meta, because they run themselves relatively low on hit points in the jungle. We saw there at the start of that fight, Frozen Knight just had a good 100, 150 more health over Ranged Pro. Turning around and fighting was never an option.
Yeah, and it was actually a really good job by Dimnus in the mid lane, using that Cassiopeia Miasma to keep I Am Eternal from even trying to rotate over and help his jungler at all. So very good presence of mind and communication, saying, hey, don't let them come over here. I'm going to kill this guy, get us first blood.
And you've got to look at the huge snowball that's already started to roll because of that. I mean, there's a 27-5 CS differential now between the junglers. Admittedly, jungle CS is kind of misleading because of the little Russian doll camp in the form of the Krugs and the fact that Raptors have so many more minions now, but that's a lead you can't really ignore.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the gold differential right now, I mean, it's already a 1,000 gold differential, and that's just insane. At 4.5 minutes, 1,000 gold, that is not easy to overcome by any means.
Yeah, quite literally almost double. But meanwhile, we have got action across the rest of the map. Alux and Goldjet are having duel of the ages up here. Goldjet relying on that minion wave, kiting back through. It does mean that Alux is not going to continue to chase, but he comes out just about on top there. In terms of health, I'd say, but if you look at the minion counts, it's actually not going so well for him.
Yeah, it's a really obnoxious lane to play against, especially if Maokai has already gone back and got that second Doran's ring. That extra AP can affect Poppy pretty early on. The Twisted Advance does do % health damage, but also leveling up his Q, which is that ground smash, his Arcane Smash, leveling up his Arcane Smash also does a decent amount of damage early on in the game, especially while Poppy does not have any of her tank stats yet.
And go right ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, this is, the meta of poverty jungles. What makes them or poverty top lanes is what makes them so good is that they don't need a lot of money in the early game to really get going. But if they do get going in the early game, you're gonna have a bad time.
Range Pro looking to make up for his earlier misdemeanor, showing up in the mid lane but not able to find any sort of gank. Is rather difficult to land a successful gank onto the Flash Ghost Cassiopeia, especially with Eternal completely out of mana at this point. And I think a lot of this game is going to come down to whether or not Range Pro can find a way back into the match.
Yeah, I think that is very important. He can tank out pretty well, like I was talking about earlier. He does have those natural tanky stats to kind of help him going, but
here's JL getting stuck, as you said, as a headache for the enemy duo lane. He's going to be taking a big, painful bite out of Teeter. I'm not even sure how to say that. Teeter West. There we go. Oh man, but that's every summoner down for both of the laners here on the side of Santa Cruz. And a kill still goes over. That is bad news. Meanwhile, top lane, more bad news for the side of Santa Cruz as Frozen Knight gets himself a second kill and Goldjet flashes to safely.
Yeah, really good gank by Frozen Knight coming up through the unwarded try, making his way up and just wrapping around behind. Having Maokai and Rengar early on is really, it's a massive headache because Maokai can pop his ult, get those extra tank stats, sit there and tank the turret, and Rengar can just kind of, delete you, especially with that early lead that he has already. I mean, 60 CS and 2 kills, are you kidding me?
Yeah, and I mean, that was such a sort of cut and dried gank as well. There wasn't really anything too terribly clever going on there. They just walked at the guy. And now Ranged Pro, 2 levels under Demnus, is trying his best to find some sort of path back into this match, but he's just going to be giving his life up as that petrifying gaze froze Eternal in his tracks.
Yeah, I think that would have been a completely different story if I Am Eternal had been able to, or if I Am Eternal did not get hit by that petrifying gaze. I think it would have been a lot different story, but maybe not exactly as having it go as well, I guess, for Santa Cruz, because if you saw it at the end of that fight, there was the majority of Simon Fraser waiting in the wings, checking to see if there was going to be any other portion of a fight there.
And this early game is just working out to be devastating for UCSC. Only 4K gold behind her, so you gotta look at the clock. 4K may not seem like a lot if you've seen quite a few League of Legends games like I have at this point, but when you consider the fact that we're only 8 minutes in, that's a lead I don't think I've seen very many teams come back from.
Yeah, it's really early on, but the nice thing is that I think they still can rally, just because there's still a lot of extra gold on the map for them. First tower still hasn't been taken, so if they get a really good fight and they have the minion wave, they can maybe try to push down that first turret and help them get back into it. I would definitely say once turrets start to fall and things start to fall more in line for Simon Fraser, if they get this first turret and get this gank off in the bot lane.
The ultimates are available, and with a few R buttons pressed, Misfortune evaporates off the face of the rift. Now the dive under the turret is commencing with JL happily tanking that up, his gray health available to ferry him out to safety, and another 2 kills go over to the side of Simon Fraser.
Yeah, and this is a really good example of why I'm not a huge fan of MF support, right? She doesn't provide a whole lot of utility. She's really only good into the Zyra matchup, in my opinion, because she's able to kill the plants very, very quickly with her Make It Rain. But, honestly, she doesn't bring a whole lot to the table if she doesn't have that utility power of killing the plants. She's completely squishy, which is awful when you're playing against a Rengar.
Yeah, and even when you're playing against just a heavy CC-oriented duo lane, something like the Varus Tahm Kench, it's really difficult because you've got no mobility and almost no counter disengage yourself to escape from them simply walking at you, which is what they did. Like, we haven't seen really super fancy plays from Simon Fraser this game. They've just executed well on simple and effective things.
Yeah, and that's completely true. And I think a lot of that, like you said, it starts in the draft too. Like, it's the simple things, but the simple things can start in the draft. And I think Santa Cruz lost in the draft.
some consolation prize for them to pick up. But Tom Kench is coming up that river, and Frozen Knight is there with him. What looked like a faint light at the end of the tunnel turned out just to be a train running down the tracks, and it rolls right over. Another 2 kills for the side of Fraser.
Yeah, this is definitely not going as I expected. You asked me in, hang on.
We may have to get back to your point, and I'm sure it was a good one, but Demnus being gone is the first kill back on the board for Santa Cruz. But it must be way too little, way too late at this point.
Yeah, and then Maokai's going to burn his teleport. He should be able to protect that tower, since they don't have that.
This is an interesting engage there onto Slapphone, but there just isn't enough damage to really punish it. And actually, Frozen Knight coming around the corner, even through the exhaust, is dominating, and aptly so. There's Goldjet coming in for the engage. It's another kill for the Rengar, 7-0 at this point.
Please have mercy, Frozen Knight. They did not know the sins that they had committed.
Oh man,
Holy
the night
moly,
is cold and full of terrors. Frozen, even, and full of terrors.
Yeah, there are only wolves in the world, little sheep.
Yeah?
Only wolves.
I thought it was pretty good. I don't know. I was hoping for a giggle, but, you know, I'll settle for that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I like smiled and chuckled. I forget that you and I are not in person like I'm used to.
Oh, man. I get way too much of a kick out of my horrible jokes, but I'm sure no one else does, so we'll get back to the gameplay. What little of it there really is, I mean, there's almost a kill a minute for the side of Simon Fraser.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kill a minute, and it's a turret every 3 at this point. Those are some very abusive stats. I said that 4.5K not awful, since there weren't any turrets down on the map, but now there's 4 turrets down on the map, and they're going to start to have a real problem, because now they're going to have to start. They're basically going to start suffocating for gold, because they're not going to be able to use their towers for protection to try to CS at all. So they're going to have to hope that Simon Fraser does a bad engage and they get a pick and they can make something happen off of it. But right now, if you look at the CS differentials and everything across the board, they're too far behind that even if they do get a favorable trade in the team fight, it's not going to be great.
Goldjet happily trading here with Alex. He's not really that far ahead in terms of itemization, but he's just a level ahead at this point, and he's got the confidence to even go for the 1v2 here. Range Pro is just almost a non-issue. He's ignoring the Jarvan at this point. Range Pro is taking simply incidental damage from Arcane Smash and the Bammy Cinder, and Goldjet brings him down. He wasn't even autoing him. He wasn't even aiming the spells at the Jarvan.
Yeah, he really wanted that Poppy.
Flash forward from Demnus. He's going for something here. I'm not really sure what it was, but they forced them off the turret. They take another turret, as if they really needed more laurels to rest on. They're more than 10k gold ahead at 13 minutes.
Yeah, I mean this is crazy, and that's the point that I was kind of going at right before that 2v1 happened in the top lane, and then the flash and petrifying gaze in the bot lane happened. Is that you are in a really bad spot right now, because there's no way you can't get out of your base anymore to try to get any gold. Like, trying to contest this second tier turret in the mid lane is like, even though it's just the Varus and the Tom Kench, you have to be careful, because you don't know if Simon Fraser is lurking in your bot lane jungle. I mean, your bot side jungle. It's very hard.
And so do you, if you're on the side of UCSC, do you just consider this game a given loss at this point? This seems an almost insurmountable deficit. Do you then take this time to try and simply get as much of a read on your opponents as you can and go into the next draft maybe a little more prepared and try to rescue the series rather than the game?
Yeah, that's how I would go about it, because a 801 Rengar and a 105 Maokai that was able to take on both your jungler and your top laner at the same time. I would definitely agree with your point that you use this time, you try to stall out the game as long as you can, you take a breather, you realize, hey, we messed up, we shouldn't have given over that Rengar. And you go and look at, like, what are some things that we can change? Maybe what are some faults that we had besides from our draft? Like, what did we do wrong in lane? and how are these guys playing, and how can we kind of exploit that for the next game? Try to save the series, like you said.
Yeah, because we are in a series here. This isn't the death knell for UCSC. If the seemingly inevitable takes place and they do give up this first game, they've got another 2 matches to come back, but it does put them teetering on the brink of defeat, as it is a best of 3. They've only got to lose 2, and they are out. Some of it does come down to the draft. I'd say for sure the misfortune pick, we've harped on it a few times, but it does seem to be lackluster. Honestly feels like an understatement. But also, they just didn't seem to know how to come back from an early deficit, particularly in the jungle. Ranged Pro lost that first kill, gave up first blood, and was at a 30 or more CS deficit for the entire game at this point because of it.
Yeah, that's exactly true, and I think a lot of that was not being super mindful of the Rengar pick.
Oh boy.
You know,
we've gotten engaged. Frozen Knight is going to be devoured away from the arrow. Frozen Knight is legendary as well as a piercing arrow finds its way onto the Ashe. And Varus is king of the Bowyers. He has to push on the mid lane now.
the Bowyers.
Hey, it really is kind of a dual Ashe Varus, the two bow wielding. I don't know, perhaps that's not quite as clean a statement as I could have gone with, but JL is pulling Goldjet to safety as if he really needed it. Is there any danger really left on the Rift at all for SFU?
No, there's not. Nowhere is safe. Nowhere is safe from Simon Fraser. You can have as many wards as you want, but they will walk at you and they will kill you while they walk at you.
Yeah, it's like having vision or knowledge that there's an atomic bomb coming. It doesn't really change too much, just gives you a sense of impending doom.
It's like one of those things. It's like, wow, I just wish I had realized that this was the outcome sooner.
But SFU's got to be sitting pretty. I mean, we've been looking at this from UCSC's position for the last few minutes now, but if you're SFU, you've got to go into the next draft assuming Frozen Knight's not going to get Rengar. Because if we look down the KDA, so much of this power is concentrated on that pick, and it's what started the snowball. So what then is your plan for the next draft? Do you work around, do you still like put that jungle focus on? Or do you try and pick just a similar champion? Really, we just kind of have to talk about the next draft because this game is almost definitively over.
Yeah, this game is pretty much over, and so talking about the next draft, I think is a good step. I would say get rid of the misfortune. Don't do that again. It just wasn't picked into the right comp at all. I would say change the Jarvan pick. Maybe pick up a Zac or something like that. Zac at least offers a little bit more in terms of escapability from that Rengar early on. And at least a little more in terms of tank. And it looks like Range Pro is going to die again. It's just going to go right back into Dimness.
Very possibly. Yeah, familiar now with the grayscale of the death screen. He's going to watch League of Legends, the black and white movie. And here comes JL with Nemantic to the back lines. There's the bullet time, but really barely even tickling the side of Simon Fraser as Goldjet just walks through everything. All that and a bag of chips, he doesn't mind at all. And yeah, this is just Simon Fraser kind of concluding the inevitable. JL pulls Maokai to safety at the last moment. That small consolation prize even being ripped away from them. And this is the death knell.
Yeah. This is pretty much the end, and you know, even at 19 minutes, the short death timers are still enough for SFU to just kind of not really care and you know, do some stuff to this Nexus.
All right. Well, with all that said, and a lot of it done by the side of SFU, we are going to be going to a quick commercial break while we get the teams ready for game number 2. UCSC has got some serious thinking to do if they want to come back into this series. And it looks like Simon Fraser might just have an easy road to a clean slate, as they are, as yet, still undefeated. Give us just a few minutes, folks, and we'll be right back.
Only $14.99.
Don't miss the call. Download Band. Communication made easy.